In the last video, we got to see how to set up global illumination. We saw some of the basics as well as a few methods there for tweaking global illumination, making it look pretty good. Alright, in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to continue with global illumination. But instead of just going over the basics and showing you basically how to turn it on, and how to control a few of the parameters, now we're going to see how to use global illumination in a real world example. We're going to go ahead and pretend we're doing a studio project for an actual client, and the goal is to set up a nice global illumination render for the following scene. So the scene we're going to open up, let's go ahead and open up a scene here. The scene we're going to open up is called 03 Scene Apartment GI Start. So let's go ahead and open that scene up. Not a very interesting name for the scene, but a pretty interesting scene nonetheless. So if we go ahead and go to shaded view, you can see the scene that we have. And before we move anything, let's go ahead and do a render here. And this is what we have, a very fast render here. This is with default settings. Basically all we have here is geometry with some shaders and materials, textures, but we don't have any lights set up. Okay, right now the only thing that's lighting up this scene is the default Maya light. So let's go ahead and let's close this. And let's have a look at our settings here, our render settings. If we go down here, we can see under render options, there's the enable default light option. And pretty much all of the other options are the default options that you would expect when opening a new scene with Maya here and switching over to the mental ray renderer. So we don't have any global illumination, we don't have anything in here, not even a single light actually. So our job in this video here is to set up the direct lighting. We're going to do this systematically. We're going to first set up direct lighting, and then we're going to go ahead and focus on indirect lighting with global illumination. Direct lighting is the lighting that's coming directly from your lights. It can be from a sunlight, it can be from a light bulb, it can be from any type of light that actually creates, that's a light source, that actually creates light. Indirect illumination will come from indirect illumination algorithms such as final gathering, importans, and global illumination or irradiance particles. In this case, we're going to work with global illumination as the indirect illumination algorithm. So let's go ahead and start setting up our lights here. First thing we're going to do is go up to create lights, and we're going to create ourselves some area lights. So we'll start off with one area light here. And what I want to do to complement my lighting here and create a very nice lighting rig is, you can see that we have these different windows here. We have a window way over here on the right, then we have this large 3-pane window here, and then we have another 2-pane pretty large window over here on the left. What we want to do is stick an area light at each one of those areas. Now we could stick an area light in each one of those window panes, which wouldn't look too bad. However, it's going to be a very expensive render. When I say expensive render, what I mean is a pretty slow render. The more area lights we have, the longer the render is going to take. So what you want to do is optimize things here. And to be honest with you, in the final render, no one's going to be able to tell the difference if this window over here, for example, used one light or used 3. So let's go ahead and just use one so that we can render as fast as possible, because that's very important for production. So what I want to do here is I want to rotate this light here 90 degrees. I could do that a couple of ways. I can type in -90 up here in the channel box. Okay, next thing I want to do is I want to scale this this light to fit with the size of the window a little bit better. Now you don't want the light to be the same exact size of the window. The larger this light is and the more it's scaled, the more artifacting it's going to create with the area light shadows later. That means we're going to need to use more samples to get rid of those artifacts, and that of course is going to slow rendering down. So we don't want to make this light larger than it needs to be to go ahead and create the lighting we're going after. Okay. So I'm going to move this light a little bit closer here. Now I'm looking at my channel box up here where it says translate X. And right now it's at -43. I'm probably going to get it to about -40, -41, something like that. Looks pretty good. And then for the scale, let's use some pretty clean numbers. Let's come in here to scale. Let's round this off from 4.69 to 5. And then the scale Y, it's 7.3 right now. Let's go ahead and put that to 8. Okay, that looks pretty good. Alright, I'm going to say that I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to go ahead and open up the attribute editor here for this light, and I'm going to go to decay. I want to give it some quadratic decay. I'm also going to go to the mental ray settings here and turn this into a mental ray area light by selecting use light shape. I'm going to increase the amount of samples, not too much. I'm just going to go to 16 for the moment, just for preview rendering here. And I'm also going to go to shadows and activate ray trace shadows here so that it has shadows. And of course we're going to need a higher intensity, so let's go something like 1000. And let's go inside the room here and let's do an IPR. Select our region there. And there we go. Now we have some light in this room. Looks pretty good. Let me go ahead and brighten that up a little bit. So I don't want to brighten it up by too much. So let's go from 1000 to 1500. It's basically becoming a little bit brighter there. So that looks a little bit better. I'm not going to make it too bright now, because if I continue making it brighter, we're going to get these very hot burn marks here from the lighting on the wall and on the ceiling. We're going to look at later at something called tone mapping that's going to fix that up for us. So we're not going to worry about that too much at the moment. If I go back to mental ray, I'm happy with the settings I have so far. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so that light is set up. Now what I need to do is pretty much, instead of doing a whole bunch of work all over again, I'm going to do a little shortcut here. I'm just going to hit Control D on the keyboard, D as in dog, to duplicate this light and move it over. And I'm going to use this same light for the other two windows here. Okay. That light's pretty good right there in that spot. In terms of the scaling, let's go ahead and let's scale this guy in the X here a little bit bigger. Something like that's going to work out pretty good. Okay, and everything else is already set up for us. It's already a mental ray area light. If we go to the attribute editor here, because we duplicated the other light, it already inherited all the settings from the previous light. So it's already a mental ray area light. It already has quadratic decay, and it already has shadows enabled. So let's duplicate this light as well. Control D on the keyboard to do that again. Let's rotate this guy about, it's going to have to be up here in the Y to negative 180. Now we have to move him into position here. And that looks pretty good right there. I'm not going to fiddle around with it too much. As far as the scaling goes, I'm going to leave the scaling as it is right now, because this looks pretty good. Alright, let me go in here and let's do an IPR from inside. Now I'm doing pretty large renders here, 640 by 480. Normally I wouldn't do that, but so it's easier to see in the tutorial, I'm going with that larger size. I recommend you go with a smaller size to do faster renders. And it's a little bit hot here right now. Instead, let me do this. Let me open up the attribute editor for this new light I created. And let me try lowering this intensity a little bit here to about 1000. Okay, that's much nicer. See how a lot of that, those burning highlights from the light just went away and disappeared? That's fantastic. Okay, so let me close that. Let's probably do another render from somewhere in here just to see what we have so far. And I'll do it with the IPR. The IPR is just fantastic. Alright, you gotta love those area light shadows. They're so realistic. They're so soft. They just look so convincing. So this scene automatically looks so much better than what it looked like before with the default light. If you remember, it looked pretty horrible the first time we did a render. Now it's starting to look pretty decent. Okay, so with that done, what I want to do is create one more light. And this time, I'm going to go to Create Lights. I'm going to create a directional light, and this light is going to mimic our sun. Okay, now the light is somewhere inside the apartment here, and the icon's pretty small. So I can work with the icon a lot better. I'm going to go ahead and scale it up. Scaling up the icon for the directional light doesn't affect the lighting at all. It doesn't change the shadows on it. It doesn't change the brightness of it. all it does is, well, change the size of the icon to make it easier or more difficult to work with in the viewport. Okay, so let me just move it up here. And another thing to make note of is that the directional light, unlike area lights, spotlights, and point lights, makes no difference when you move it. If I move it left or right, up or down, front or back, it's going to make no difference in the lighting. The only thing that's going to make a difference in the lighting in terms of rotating, scaling, or moving is rotation, because that changes the orientation of the parallel light rays this thing is shooting out. And I already have some rotation values that I got from earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and just type those in. This one's going to have to be about -54. I'll go to the next channel here to the rotate Y. Make that -106. And then for the rotate Z, let's make that -20. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty nice. Okay, I'm going to say I'm happy with that. Let's go to the attribute editor and make some changes here. And before I actually make any changes, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do some renders here so you can see how the light's affecting the scene. I think that's going to be a lot better than just telling you what to change and not showing you what it's changing, because then it's going to be more difficult to actually learn what's going on. So here's the directional light. If I go ahead and turn off the illuminates by default, I'm going to have to refresh the IPR here, create a new IPR. There it goes. Okay, the directional light is off. Very quickly, what we just saw when the IPR didn't update, that's what I talked about in an earlier video when we were going over the IPR, and I mentioned that there's some things that the IPR just can't do. That was one of them. If you change this setting, illuminates by default on a light, the IPR won't actually refresh. So here's the directional light. It's not affecting our scene right now. If I go ahead and turn it back on, do another IPR here, you can see there's the directional light from the sun, but it's coming into the whole room. The reason that's happening is it has no shadows. So let's go ahead and turn on ray trace shadows for that light, and it updates. There we go, perfect. And here we can see the shadows from that sunlight. You can see them here from the window, which is excellent. We're not going to do any mental ray options over here for this light. It doesn't need them. What I am going to do is change the color of the light. So I'm going to click on the color chooser here, and I'm going to make this sort of a warm kind of color. Let's switch from HSV to RGB. It's going to make things a lot easier. And for the R channel, let's go to about 0.9, something like that. For the green, let's keep it at 1, and for the blue channel, let's switch to something like 0.8, and that gives us a sort of pale yellowish warm color. Okay, now there's something else that I want to do. What I'm going to do is take my camera here and I'm going to zoom in pretty close to where the shadows of this sunlight are going to land. Okay, so here's the shadow of the sunlight. We can see it here on the floor. It's being projected by the window, of course, the window frame. And right now, it's just this sort of straight edge. It looks kind of like a stencil or something, or like someone came in here and carefully painted a line on a road. That doesn't look very realistic and doesn't look very good from up close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the ray trace shadow attributes here for the directional light and make some changes. If I increase the light angle here, I'll make those shadows much softer. Now, this of course makes them way too soft, and it no longer looks any good. So let me go ahead and change that back. It's a very sensitive setting. It was set to 0 before. Let's actually put it to a setting of 1. Oops, that's 4. Okay, there goes that IPR, hard at work. And there it is. You can see it's a little fuzzy and it's too much. So let me reduce it to about 0.5 instead. There we go, that looks a little bit better. Now you can see that we have, it kind of works like an area light in the sense that when the shadow is right here close to this wall, it's a straight edge, it's very sharp. As it gets farther away, it gets soft. Now you notice that it looks grainy and has artifacts. Two reasons. One, the preview settings we're using now for the IPR, the settings right now are using the render settings, and the render settings are set to pretty low anti-aliasing settings. Not too low, but not a good setting. But the other reason is the shadow rays. Right here we can see we have a parameter called shadow rays, by default set to 1, which renders the fastest. What we're going to do is increase that to about 4, and now you'll see that the fuzziness starts to go away. Now it becomes more realistic, starts to look nicer. So let me double that to about 8. And the more shadow rays you have, the slower the render is going to go. But in this case, it's not affecting me too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it at 8, and that looks pretty good. I'm not going to go over 8. So I'm going to close that attribute editor, close the render view there. And I think we should be done, at least setting up these lights for the scene. If we do a render from here, there we go. Alright. Doesn't look too bad. Doesn't look too bad at all. But we can see that there's something apparently wrong with the glass here. Let's zoom in, get a better look, and see what's going on. So I'll select the glass coffee table there. Zoom in a bit here. And I'll do a render. Okay. We can see that there's definitely something very, very wrong with the glass. It's reflective and it's shiny, but it's supposed to be transparent. Now this coffee table is supposed to be glass. You should be able to see through it, just like you would a piece of glass. But right now we can't. So what's causing this? Is this a bug? Is my mental ray broken? No, it's not. Let's go to the render settings for mental ray here, and let's go to quality. And under quality we have a ton of options here. I'm going to go ahead and collapse all of these different parameter sets here. That way things look a little bit more organized and cleaner. And you should see one called ray tracing up here. Go ahead and expand that one out. Ray tracing is extremely important because ray tracing is going to control transparency and reflections, which is extremely important when doing a scene like this apartment scene we're doing here. So this coffee table is supposed to be transparent. We should be able to see through it, and we can't right now. That's because right now our reflections and our refractions controlling transparency, are set to only 1. This means that reflections and refraction rays are only going to shoot once in the scene, and that's it. We need those rays to be able to hit different surfaces and go through them. In this case, refraction rays. Right now, they can only hit one surface, and that's it. Well, the glass table is actually 2 surfaces because you have the front and the back. So we need this thing to be able to at least go through 2. So to not limit this thing, I'm not going to be cheap. What I'm going to do to solve this problem altogether, I'm going to increase the amount of reflections to 5, refractions to 5, and then the max, I'm going to do 10. The reason I'm doing 10 is because the max should be set to whatever the sum of these two are. So if this is 5 and 5, this should be 10. If this was 2 and 2, this should be 4. But 2 and 2 and 4 is too low of a number. So we're going to use 5, 5, and 10, which should be more than enough to get this to render out correctly. So let me just do render region here. Render that out. And there we go. Now we have some transparency. Now we can actually see through the glass. But we're going to notice that there's another problem. And if you look carefully, you might notice it might be a little bit difficult to catch it. There's something wrong with what we're looking at here. Let me try to show you what I'm talking about here through the viewport. We have a light coming in from outside, right? Obviously, some things are going to cast shadows. For example, this window frame is going to cast shadows. In particular, the leg here from our coffee table is going to cast shadows right about here. And I'll prove that to you by doing an IPR here. So we can see that yes, there is a shadow being cast here by the light outside the window, which looks really nice. Here's the problem. If I try to look at the shadow through the glass table, we're going to run into an issue. And you can see it here very clearly. The shadow mysteriously disappeared. So where'd the shadow go? Where is it? And why is it not showing up? Well, that's where this shadow parameter right here in the ray trace settings for the render settings comes into play. Right now the shadows is only set to a max step of 2. We need to increase that. So we're going to increase that to about 4. Now we're going to watch it update. And you notice that it didn't fix the problem. What's going on? Well, what's going on is that we have to set the shadow depth in the render settings, but we also have to set it for the lights. See, if I go ahead and select this area light that's right here, let's open up its attribute editor. Let's go to shadows, and under ray trace shadow attributes, we'll notice that there is a parameter here for the ray depth limit. What we want to do is increase that to about the same parameter as the render settings, 4, which is going to be enough. Let's close that. Let's come back to our coffee table here. Let's do another IPR, and again, let's render out that area where the shadow was missing, and let's try to see if that shadow's back. And voila, there it is. It's a little bit faint and difficult to see because of the transparent glass, but the shadow is actually right there. And to prove it to you, what I'm going to do is, let me just do a larger IPR here, just so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, the shadow's pretty faint, but it's pretty much there. I'll click on Keep Image. I'll go back to my render settings, and I'll take the shadows back down to the default of 2. And I'll let it render again. Okay, little oopsie there. Let me see if rendering this out again like this will work. Ah, there it is. Damn it. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that part again. Okay, tell you what, let's do this instead. There we go. Okay, editor, we're going to pick up right here after I set up the options for the ray depth settings on this light here. We're going to pick up in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let me go back to this coffee table here. Let's do an IPR. Render this out. We can see that the shadow is not there. Let's go back to the render settings. And looks like I somehow failed to set that back to 4. And you can see it's not updating there. That's because we have to do a new IPR. No. Goodness. Okay, editor. We're gonna do that again. So pick up and start up in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so now what I want to do is come over here to my coffee table here. Getting pretty close. Let's do an IPR. Let's render this area out here where the shadow is supposed to be. And there's the shadow. It's a little bit faint, a little bit difficult to see, but it's actually right there. You can see it. So now that's actually working the way it's supposed to. Okay. So let's just do a quick IPR here. Just kind of render this out from different angles here, make sure that we got everything we were supposed to. And again, we just wanted to set up our direct lighting in this scene, which looks pretty good. Here's some renders from different angles. Not too shabby. Okay, it's looking pretty nice. Pretty realistic. You gotta love those mental ray area lights. They're fantastic for doing pretty much anything, but especially they really shine when you use something like this, like an architectural type scene or visualization of a product or anything like that. These area lights are simply fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to say I'm happy with that. I'm going to end this video here, and in the next video we're going to go from direct illumination to global illumination, add that indirect illumination to our scene. So we'll see that in the next video.